Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good day, wherever you are in the world today. Welcome to our Big Book 12-Step workshop. Today we're going to be taking a look at an aspect of 12-step spirituality. Something that I've never focused on before. Principles. We've looked at all of the three major steps in our way of living. 10, 11, and 12, that's the code word Bill uses for that formula. The first 9 steps, the program of recovery. The next 3 steps, 10, 11, and 12, he calls our way of life, our way of living. And we'll be taking a look at them as the context for one piece of step 12, practicing principles in all our affairs. So what do we mean by principle? Spiritual principles, human principles, emotional principles, spiritual awakening, our way of life, and practice. We'll be navigating these questions and these topics today. First, I'd like to introduce Melissa, who is the host from the Retreat Center, who is going to the Retreat Center supports us in all of the administration and registration, and she's going to tell you a little bit about that.
Thank you so much, Herb, for supporting the Mary and Joseph Retreat Center along with everyone here today on Zoom. Herb has been connected to the Mary and Joseph Retreat Center for many years, and he is truly a part of our family. His 12-step and centering prayer groups have been extremely popular at the Retreat Center for decades. And now, since the start of the pandemic, he has moved these popular offerings to Zoom. Herb's journey includes 7 years in Claretian Seminary, a graduate education in psychology, 40 years in human resources consulting, certification as a spiritual director, 37 years of active participation in a 12-step fellowship, and the publication of 3 books on spiritual awakening. I'm sure there's much more to add. Maybe Herb and I can talk next time so I could change up his curriculum vitae there. So we are delighted that he's donating the proceeds of these Zoom gatherings to our retreat center during this difficult time. So thank you, everybody, for your generosity and your presence.
Thanks, Melissa, and thanks for all the support the Retreat Center gives us. It has a very big place in my personal life and our family's life. My wife first heard about a possibility of a problem with alcohol and a probability of solution through the 12-step program at the Retreat Center when she was on retreat there in 1983. She then got sober in 84, as I did get caught in the whatever they call that, the wind. And then eventually she became a staff member there and basically was the executive director for 20 years. So a very, very big part of my life. So I talked about the agenda for today. And what I mean by spiritual, I don't mean magical or mystical or mysterious. I don't mean that. It's something very concrete to me. It's about relationship. Took me a long while to get what I consider to be a very accurate word, relationship. One of my mentors in the program early on a fellow named Frank. He was a very interesting, very bright, very articulate, long-term member of AA. And he said, there are two sides to the program of Alcoholics Anonymous: the spiritual side and the outside. I have to think about that for a minute. There's two sides to the spiritual, to the 12-step program: spirituality side and the outside. Of course, then he would clarify, it's all spiritual, because the whole point of it is to find a power other than ourselves, whether you do it through the 12-step process or some other traditional or non-traditional process. It doesn't make any difference. No, seriously. Find your path. The Buddhists talk about human development and happiness has three components: a path, a teacher, and a community. Brilliant. And take a look at our 12-step program. Of course, that's where I come from. I try not to be an evangelist, but it's hard not to. When you find the cure of cancer, why wouldn't you run to the top of the mountain and continue to try to communicate it to the balance of the people who are suffering? I looked at organized religion, as most of you know. I looked at organized psychology. I was going to be a professional in one or other of those programs, a priest or a psychologist. But I didn't connect to either one of them. After a very long exposure and attempt. But when I came into the 12-step program, eventually, it took 4 or 5 years for me to thaw out sufficiently to hear somebody who could, in fact, speak clearly and experientially about their journey in the 12 steps, using the big book as a textbook. This person was a mechanic with the big book. And I don't mean that in any superficial or robotic fashion. I mean it that they actually knew all of the details of the suggested application of each of the steps. Spirituality is a relationship with life, a relationship with myself, and a relationship with others. It's as simple as that. I'll come back to that periodically throughout our gathering today. First of all, I would invite you to join me in this set-aside prayer. Most of you have exposure or experience with it. Some of you may not. It's not an official prayer. It's a prayer that I was introduced to back when I was 10 years sober. 10 years sober. The third time I was going through the step work with one of those mechanics. He took a look at the words on page 58. Some of us have tried to hold on to our old ideas, and the result was nil until you let go absolutely. You may clarify and you may confirm what you know about spirituality and what you know about the 12-step process today. That may happen. I hope you actually see something brand new, something fresh, but you won't if you hold on to the lenses through which you've looked historically. And you don't know that you don't know, and you can't see that you can't see, because I know that, because that was my formula. That was my experience. I think it's the human condition, not just the addict condition, but it's the addict condition on steroids because of the addiction. Whether you're abstinent and sober, clean or not, we still have these very deep organic predispositions to blindness. So this is a prayer that invites the Spirit, whatever it is you believe or don't believe in, just for the next hour and a half or so, believe that I believe and be guided by that. But it's not a prayer for you to set it aside. It's a prayer for intervention. Intervention. We're asking whatever there is as a energy power other than myself, other than my human functionality, to enter into my soul at the deepest level and to open my mind and open my heart. Do it to me, please. I'm inviting intervention for a new experience, for some new information, for some new resources to help me navigate my life. That's really the point here. The whole point of principles. I call them guidelines and guardrails. And I didn't know that there were principles. With all of that exposure in organized religion and all of that exposure in psychology, I was never self-consciously aware that there were operating principles in the universe. It was only when I did the fourth step in the big book, repetitively. I did it 3 different times over a 10-year period. And it began to emerge to me, it began to be plain to me that there were principles that I did have that I did not apply, but there were also principles that I wanted to have that I didn't have, that had never occurred to me, that I wanted to have in order to be a decent human being. Guidelines and guardrails. Please join me in this prayer. Out loud, you're all on mute, or at least you're supposed to be, and or quietly to yourself, or not at all, but with the commitment to this attitude of open mind and open heart. God, please set aside everything that I think I know about myself, my unmanageability, my spiritual path, and you, for an open mind and a new experience with myself, my unmanageability, my spiritual path, and especially you. It's always good to start with questions. Those of you who have been exposed to me know that's a technique, a pedagogy that I picked up from the big book. Asking questions and then unpacking it with some knowledge and with some experience. One of my teachers says we ask the question in the milieu of prayer. We hold the asked but unanswered question, hoping that the energy from the asked but unanswered question will percolate in us and take us to a place that we've never been before, that we've never experienced before, that will give us new information and a new experience. Ask yourself today, not when you were in your addiction, and you may still be in your addiction, and that might be the answer to the question. Please remember that you're powerless over your addiction. So it's not about judgment, please. It's not about beating yourself up over it. It's not about rolling over either and giving up and being passive. No, we're powerless, but we're responsible. Some of that might come out today. Most of that's come out if you've ever been exposed to any of my work. Where is my life not working today? No, it might be finances. It might be relationships. It might be work. It might be health. Where is my life not working today? Pick one or two of the larger, the more substantive, not the picayune, not the small, not the mosquitoes, but the 100-pound tuna and the 2,000-ton white shark. How you doing? Really, seriously, how effective is your effort at these things? Look back over your shoulder for a minute at the last year, maybe 5 or 10. That's the only way I know anything, is in the rearview mirror. Not looking at my thoughts, not looking at my feelings, but looking at my behavior and the quality of my life. My behavior. Am I a person of integrity? Do I say what I'm going to do and do what I say I'm going to do? Am I rigorously honest with myself, transparently, and with others? Appropriately. Need to know kind of stuff. Do I really want to change? A lot of people I've come across say, I have character defects, but those have been very useful to me. They have allowed my life to be successful in this area, that area, that area. Well, with some challenge and some discussion and some introspection, I think they finally end up understanding that that's a delusion. By definition, a character defect cannot contribute to the positive quality of your life. So by definition, a character defect is a disorder which will never bring order. What change specifically would you like? Think about that one thing, that if that would shift, the quality of your life would get smoother, would get better, would get more satisfaction, would bring some level of harmony and contentment to your life. One change. Maybe it's more sleep, a little exercise, a reduction in my sugar intake, going to an additional meeting, or dropping a couple meetings, getting a sponsor that I really trust, getting a sponsor, terminating a relationship with a sponsor because you've outgrown them. Rigorous honesty. I wonder what that means. I bet you it means rigorous honesty. Transparency, having your insides and your outsides match. And my most favorite question, I ask it every morning in my meditation. I ask it of myself, and I ask it of the spirit that I'm in contact with. I'm in conscious contact with the spirit of the universe. And this is the story I make up for my meditation. I don't actually have any certitude about it or any special feeling about it most of the time. But I ask anyway, what is my invitation today? Right now, as some of you know, I'm planning for 2022. So I'm regularly sitting quietly asking, what is my invitation for 2022? It's going to change. Intentionally, I'm going to be very conscious about my approach to the use of my time. What is my invitation? If you've had any exposure to me at all, you've seen Pathetic Herbie in Bondage. Now, this was a cartoon series that I saw in the New Yorker magazine probably 50 years ago. And as I was beginning to try to help people with understanding this process and this program and these steps, it came back to me, and I had my person who does my PowerPoints recreate them. This was me in addiction. But at 10 years of sobriety, this was me in unmanageability. Addiction had been removed prior to my ever coming to 12-step. That's a story for a different day, but I really mean exactly what I said. Alcohol, I was delivered from my drinking, delivered. Bill used that word in a talk I heard about 2 weeks ago, tape, of course. He said, we are delivered from our addiction. Oh my God, that is such a precise way of saying it, recognizing the impact of grace. We are delivered. I was delivered, given freedom from, without even asking. A couple months later, I went to Alcoholics Anonymous, became quite active. 4 or 5 years later, I engaged the mechanic step guide with the textbook. And I recognized that I was in the bondage of an addiction. I didn't know about addiction, what it really was, until I did this work out of the big book. I have a problem of the body and a problem of the mind, and I'm powerless. And it really means no choice. We become brain dead to the word powerless. No choice. That really captures it. When I take a drink, I lose control. When I don't take a drink, I will take a drink. Either way, I'm in bondage of addiction. But at 10 years of sobriety, I saw that I was in bondage to myself, even though I'd been given freedom from addiction and my life had qualitatively improved, and I'd had 2 spiritual awakenings, meaning changes, nothing fancy, no light or smoke, no burning bushes, except for in the rearview mirror, in retrospect, I saw that I had been changed. No, radically changed. I had become a sensitive and decent human being mostly. I was given freedom from this bondage. Through this 12-step process, as I mentioned, the 12-step spirituality, there's that word again, is a relationship. In this case, I used the term power rather than what I did originally this morning when I used the term life. But they're synonyms. Steps 1 through 3 gives us a relationship with power. That's the whole point. Because we come to the program, we come to this process, we come to asking help because we're helpless and hopeless and powerless and no choice. And we have an experience, or at least some vague sense that we need help. And then it's our responsibility. That's the other part of it, to do some work. Grace is great. Willingness is essential. In fact, Bill says that on page 47 in the big book in step 2. Willingness is the cornerstone to a spiritual arch through which we walk to a new freedom. And as we then complete the step process, finishing our 9th step, we're reestablishing or establishing a relationship with others. Spirituality, a relationship with power, a relationship with myself, a healthy relationship with myself and then with others. All well and good. That's where a lot of people stop, if they ever get that far, actually. And they don't realize. Bill takes us then to what I call optimal living. The first 9 steps are optimal recovery. The next 3 steps, Bill says, are essential. My words, not his. But he says we enter the world of the spirit. After step 9, page 84 and 85, he gives us the promises on 83, 84, and then he says, are these extravagant? No, they're not. They're exact promises that will materialize if we work for them. Listen to the words. I'm not paraphrasing. If we work for them. This brings us to steps 10, 11, and 12, he says, in summary. I'm summarizing what he says. We commence this way of life. That's the term he uses, way of life. That's the motto. That's the slogan. That's the phrase that he uses 20 different times in the big book, way of life, to signify the program of living. Steps 10, 11, and 12. He said, we're not cured. We have a daily reprieve. We're going to talk more about that. On page 25, he says, we're rocketed into a fourth dimension. Again, that spiritual connotation, fourth dimension. Contrast to three-dimensional reality, which is our common experience, height, width, and depth. Material reality. Bill is introducing us to a spiritual reality, a non-material, an invisible. Takes a lot of faith. A decision that whatever we're talking about is actually true without any evidence. But we go through the process and we begin our ride in the rocket ship. It's a powerful metaphor. If you think about it, the rocket ship is there, you get on board the rocket, and the rocket takes you where the rocket's going to go. Sure, there's some dials and there's some knobs and there's some actions that we need to take inside the rocket ship to make sure that it stays on its trajectory, but it's taking you where it's going to go. Bill says we're recovered. Oh my goodness. This is not poetry. This is a word on the second title page of the big book. The first title page has the name of the book, Alcoholics Anonymous. But the second title page says Alcoholics Anonymous, how thousands of men and women have recovered. It's intentional. It's very conscious. It correlates exactly with what he says on page 84, 85. We are placed in a position of neutrality, or as I mentioned in my opening comments, we are delivered. Hear it, the rocket ship. We are delivered to a place that we can't get to on our own. Now, we do a lot of work, but the outcome is disproportionate to my effort. You've heard me talk about it. Again, if you've had any exposure to me, 1 + 1 in the math room equals 2. But in the spiritual room equals 5. My willingness translates into my action. But grace translates into a disproportionate outcome to my action. My life flourishes, and it has flourished for 32 years. If you paid attention and did the math, or were listening to Melissa, sober in 1984, I've been sober for 37 years. I just said I flourished for 32. That was very intentional. I was sober for those first 5 years, but I did not flourish. I was restless, irritable, and discontent. That I didn't know that because I'd always been restless, irritable, and discontent, and I had no point of reference that there was anything else other than that, because that was my total life experience to that point. And it was only after I finished the first 9 steps, looked in the rearview mirror a year later, and I go, oh, I'm breathing easily now. I have a sense of serenity, harmony, and contentment now. Those are really new experiences. I've been taken from this bondage because I made a commitment to turn. You see, step 3 is about self-will run riot. Identifying it as evidenced in the bedevilments on page 52. That's a word in that paragraph, that second paragraph, that has a behavioral description of what unmanageability looks like. And pages 60 to 62 that actually describe the underlying cause and condition, the source of that unmanageability. Self will run riot. And the whole point of step 3 is to be in alignment. The proper use of my will, that which makes me specifically human, the ability to make total free choice about my life, about life in general, about my relationship with life, about my relationship with myself, about my relationship with others. Notice the words on the slide. We do not turn our will and our life over to God. That's not what it says here, and it's not what it says in the third step. We turn our will and our life over to the care of God. Hugely different. When I get in my car, it's my car. I drive my car. I don't know where I'm going, so I put the address in the GPS. I listen to the GPS and I follow direction. The GPS takes care of me. As long as the accurate address and I listen to and follow the direction. Couldn't be a better metaphor for this journey. And steps 4 through 9 bring us to this place. This is the second cartoon. Freedom. There's still pathetic Herbie behind bars, but now he's beginning to realize there's no ceiling, there's no wall, there's no floor. He gets to drop the bars. He gets to find freedom, at first from his addiction, and then second from his unmanageability. So ask yourself the question. Number 1, huge question. Have you completed a 4th step and 5th step? I said complete. A thorough review of your life in terms of resentment and fear, dishonesty, selfishness, secrets, all on paper and all read to somebody. That's finishing your 4th and 5th step. Have you finished your 9th step? I said finish. It's total misinformation in the rooms of AA that when I hear somebody say, you'll never finish your 9th step. That's incorrect. You can finish your 9th step. It might take you a year or 2 or more, but you can finish. There are people that you shouldn't see. There are people that you can't find. You can finish those amends. There are dead people. You can finish those amends. There are dangerous people. You can finish those amends. You need to have an engagement with somebody who has some experience in those particular areas of finishing amends. And it's after you finish amends and continue with this way of life that you have a sense of well-being. Do you? Do you have a sense of contentment? What's the quality of your life? Would you use the term flourish for your life? Now, when I use the term, I don't mean perfect, please. When I use the term flourish, it means that I'm satisfied with my life on a regular basis. Now, is there any level of dissatisfaction? There's that energy, that yearning that keeps me going to both read, to know, to meditate, to get guidance, to get help from a variety of human resources. Absolutely. I'm still a seeker, even though today I'm a finder. But it's not that restless, irritable, and discontent, which was at the soul level. I have shock absorbers that handle the speed bumps of life. Do you? Most of you know my wife died 4 years ago after 52 years of marriage. The last 30, 35 years, we built a friendship. What was the best relationship I've ever had, and a soulmate. In the truest of senses, I trusted her with my soul. Took me 2 years to process. I was gentle with myself, but very conscious of it. And grief has its own time and its own process. So I don't mean our life is not without its problems or its struggles, but I mean that we are able to navigate it with a sense of dignity and a sense of self-respect. We enter the world of the spirit, Bill says. I use a model that I'm not going to explain today because I've done that many times in different contexts, and you can look at my material on YouTube, especially in step 1, which will help you if you want to pursue that model. But he says we get physical sobriety when we enter the world of the spirit. That's the term he uses in step 10. We enter the world of the spirit, but we're not cured. The best kept secret in the rooms, you've heard me say it again. I'm very conscious that most of you have seen me many times, and so some of this is a bit repetitive, or I hope not redundant, but repetitive, so that it may have a different meaning and a new flavor for you. Rocketed into this 4th dimension. I like the orbit concept. Bill uses the sunlight of the spirit. Rocketed into the 4th dimension. With the rocket launch, it goes maybe to the moon or to Mars, depending on your speculation about that. But it goes into the world of a relationship with other sunlight of the spirit, a relationship with the people in my community. I'm not cured. I have a daily reprieve based on the practice of step 10, the tool of emotional sobriety. I've done an entire workshop on that. Again, I have a variety of recordings on YouTube. I'm beginning to learn the vocabulary. I've got a wonderful person who organizes it all in different playlists. I'm not going to advertise that right now, but you can probably easily navigate that. Step 11, improved understanding. Again, another complete set of workshops. Short workshops, an hour, long workshops, 4 hours. My most favorite subject, step 11. It's about consciousness. I see that as the single word that captures the purpose of this process. Because in fact, when we become conscious, everything else changes. Consciousness, that key word. In fact, I wrote a meditation, you may have received it. God is consciousness. And to the extent that I am conscious, I am in conscious contact with that consciousness. Step 12, which is what we're talking about, a piece of it. We're only talking about a piece of it. I've done an extensive conversation about spiritual awakening. I've done an extensive conversation, recorded again on YouTube, on sponsorship, carrying the message. Today, I'm doing a modest conversation about principles. That part of step 12, which is just crucial and critical, which I didn't even know existed until after I did the steps in my 10th year of sobriety. Bill uses those two terms there in step 11 and step 12. He says we improve our conscious contact. He says that in the step itself. And on page 14, as a confirmation of what he means in Jim's story, he failed to enlarge his spiritual life. He tells us on page 14 what that means. At the very last line on page 14, to perfect and enlarge our spiritual life through work and self-sacrifice for others. Oh, we improve our consciousness in meditation. We enlarge our consciousness in helping other people. And in step 10 on pages 84, 85, he uses the other two words for understanding and effectiveness. The two things that make us specifically human, the model that I didn't unpack, is my mind and my will. My mind gets knowledge for understanding in consciousness in step 11. My will gets strengthened and is empowered and becomes effective when I help other people. We become compassionate. It's a terrific word. Passion, calm passion. Passion comes from the Latin passio, which means energy or feeling. Suffering, actually, is the real derivative root. Passio means suffering. I have a sense of the suffering of other people, calm with, in step 12, and I want to reduce suffering. The whole point of the 12-step process is to reduce my suffering from addiction, initially the first half of first step, and then to reduce my suffering from unmanageability, the implications of unmanageability, the second half of the first step. This is our way of life. On my screen, that bottom gets a little truncated, a little cut off there. So I'll repeat it if you don't see it. Bill uses that term, as I mentioned, especially in step 10, where he says, we commenced this way of life as we cleaned up the past. Please pay attention literally to the words. When I am working with somebody and they finish their 8th step, and we review the implications and the process of the 9th step, and they are prepared to begin doing their 9th step, I give them the instructions on 10, 11, and 12, because that's what the big book suggests. When we commence this way of life, when we begin this way of life, when we start doing step 9, we do it with the power that we derive from 10, 11, and 12. So what is a spiritual awakening? That's the promise of 12th step, isn't it? That's the purpose, that's the mission, that's the value proposition. Listen to it, having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps. I'm quoting. I emphasize I wish it had been italicized, that would have been great. Having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps. That's what it says. A spiritual awakening is not what Bill had, that mystical mountaintop phenomena. No, it's just a change, but it is a change in what? The way we think and feel and behave. Oh my goodness, that's pretty radical. A radical change in the way we think and feel and behave. I had been in a monastery for 7 years, and I came out in 1964 and I wasn't changed. I was informed, I had a great education, but I wasn't changed. I studied 5 or 6 years and did a graduate education in psychology with all the therapy that went with it, individual and group. I got lots of information, but I didn't change. I did the self-help development things of the 60s, 70s, and 80s, you know, Buddhism, transcendental meditation, LifeSpring, S training. I mean, if it was being offered as a human development thing, I'm a mad dog seeker, and I did it, including mushrooms, hashish, cocaine, and Johnny Walker Black Label. I'm a mad dog pursuit. I didn't change. Oh, I didn't know I was being changed in the reverse direction. I was deteriorating, and I didn't know that I didn't know. I came into the program in 1984 thinking I was a Renaissance man, and as it turned out, when I did a 4th step, I was a Neanderthal. Lots of information in a big club that I used to try to get my way. But now I'm experiencing, when I do this work with the guidance of a mechanic, a step guide, that knows what they're doing, that understands the big book, but has had an experience of conversion, a change that done to me, but not by me. But not without me. That combination of willingness and grace. So what about principles? Oh, it has number 12 on there. Good deal. When I was practicing this morning, it knocked off that number 12. So I don't know how it got back on there. That's great. This is not an official list. It's in my Way of Life document, which is on my website, herbk.com. I have a lot of resources, all of them downloadable for free. I do all my work for fun and for free, to quote Chuck C. Melissa had indicated I have some books. I have 3, actually. The one she didn't show you was my book on meditation that was published by Hazelton 4 years ago. And I have royalties on that. As a writer, I have royalties on the book. But all my other work, there is no money that comes to me. There's money that comes from my workshops that goes into a business account, which I use to support all of the services that I have to subcontract, like PowerPoint presentation and website management and social media management and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This was given to me for free. I bring it to you for free. These principles are not an official list. I took lots of lists from lots of people. I stand on the shoulders of giants, actually, over the years. I fine-tune this list once a year to making sure it still reflects my understanding and my experience. Last year, I made a radical change in step 10, putting in vigilance as the word. Bill says in the big book, watch for selfishness, resentment, fear, and dishonesty when they crop up. You see, we never transcend our humanity. One day at a time, we're all human beings and we make mistakes, but we don't allow ourselves to be named by our mistakes. That's the big difference anymore. When we have the self-esteem that comes from esteemable actions, especially finishing the 9th step and practicing 10, 11, and 12 on a daily basis. I hope you're hearing the rhythm of that, by the way, the message of that. That's not just poetry or an invitation to some optional work. 10, 11, and 12 is not optional. Well, of course it is. You can do it or not do it. But I wonder what he means by daily reprieve. I wonder what he means by not cured. Not about addiction. The second half of the first step is not about addiction. It's about unmanageability. On my own power, I will use my free will to choose me. I'm built, that's my default position. Selfishness, self-centeredness is the root of my humanity. I'm built that way. It's not my fault. It is my responsibility. Most people mature through a process of growing up, some sort of rite of passage, cultural or family or educational or religious, some form of rite of passage. The 12-step process is our rite of passage because we don't grow up. We stay quite juvenile, actually, quite adolescent in our emotions and in our behavior. Culture, family of origin, it doesn't matter what the explanation is. The fact is that we're, what does Bill call it? No, I think Freud called it the king baby. Yeah, or queen baby. Sitting in our high chair, 4 years old, banging on the high chair, We want more food. We want more. We want more. We want more. Thinking that we're entitled to it. That's a gross overstatement, perhaps. It certainly wasn't too gross for me. Mine was gross as I look back on it. It's totally embarrassing. 48 years old, 4 years sober, sitting in my high chair, entitled, and not knowing that I was entitled. I didn't know that I had principles until I did the fourth step. The resentment inventory indicated some of the principles, especially about rigorous honesty. The sex inventory changed my life. Not only did I see that I had principles that I had abandoned, but there were principles that I would have wanted to have it if I had been aware of them and healthy enough to want to embrace them. The answer to question number 9 on page 69, what should I have done instead? The answer to that question revealed a principle. Oh, fidelity. Oh, rigorous honesty. Oh, kindness. Oh, consideration. Clueless, 4 years sober. But because I did this work, it unpackaged for me principles that I have in me or that I don't have, but that in my consciousness I want to have. And I make decisions in step 6 and 7 to operate my life on principle, willing, but powerless. Willing, powerless, but responsible. That's the conundrum of 6 and 7, isn't it? The step 6, that I have character defects and I may be unwilling, but I need to pray for the willingness. That's the message in that single paragraph on page 76. And then the prayer, the next second paragraph on page 76, begins my Creator. It's so appropriate. I'm broken. I need to be fixed. I go back to the Maker to repair the damage. What I came to have an experience with, though, is that what's not in the big book is accountability. Willingness to change, great. Prayer to change because I'm powerless, even though I'm willing, great. Both of those are in the big book. What's not there, which was given to me in meditation and by good guidance of an experienced step guide, is now be accountable for what you're willing to do and what you're praying about and how you're behaving. Tell me every day how you're behaving in relationship to 6 and 7. Within 48 hours, my behavior changed. It took daily prayer for the next 2 years for the inclination to change. I had the principle. I was willing to operate on the principle. I was inclined against the principle for over 2 years. The behavior changed in 48 hours. The inclination went away after 2 years. I'm giving you kind of a short version of transformation, of conversion, because I had principles that were guidelines and guardrails to me. Finally, fidelity being the most obvious one. These are just suggestions based on other people's lists. I wordsmith them, as I mentioned, regularly to see if they still reflect my knowledge and my current experience. If you'll notice, I've changed for 10, 11, and 12 the actions, because first, I like alliteration, but also it represents my approach to an understanding of 10, 11, and 12. Step 10 is about conscience. Watch for that vigilance. It's the filter, my conscience, based on principles. Step 11 is about consciousness, as I've mentioned. And step 12 is about compassion, as I've mentioned. But notice the word in front, practice. I've just written a reflection. Life is a practice. God, it so takes the burden off us, especially if we have any inclination toward perfection. It's unhealthy. Of course, you already probably know that. Although you're powerless over it, you're responsible for it. That's why Bill says on page 60 at the end of the steps, progress, not perfection. He knows who we are. Progress. So we practice on a daily basis. We use the way of life. The St. Francis prayer gave me the word channel. Make me a channel. And so I use that for 10, 11, and 12. Step 10, that filter. To clear the channel, like step 4 did, the roto-rooter of the spiritual life. Step 4, it unplugs us with all of the obstacles and impediments in us so that the life of human spirit, the grace of the divine spirit can flow in us. Bill says on page 14, at the top of page 14, something that we look at when at least I take people through the second step. Simple, but not easy. A price has to be paid. It means the destruction of self-centeredness. That's that unmanageability. That's not gentle. The destruction of, the dismantling of the false self, the deconstruction of the ego, the false ego, the unhealthy ego, the warped and delusional ego. It meant the destruction of self-centeredness. I must turn in all things to the Father of light who presides over us all. In another place, he said, the sunlight of the spirit underlying the totality of reality. I may be paraphrasing. The sunlight of the spirit. Recently, in the last probably year, I've been using the metaphor of darkness and light much more because it's easy to communicate. That darkness in us comes from our self-centeredness, comes from the root of self-centeredness and the fruit of the root in our anger and our fear and our shame and our dishonesty and our secrets. Those are the clouds in us that block the sunlight in us from us. And obviously then, since it's blocked in us to us, it's blocked through us. We can't give what we don't have, but we do give what we do have. We're very familiar with the vocabulary of pandemic now and contagion. We're contagious. If we are living in this bedevilments and the spiritual malady, that's what we're transmitting. But if we've gone through a process and completed the 5th step and then completed the 9th step, we've been transformed. And now we transmit the light. We transmit the spirit. You see, we're always transmitting. We're transmitting either the darkness or we're transmitting the light. And to the extent that we live in darkness, we transmit it. To the extent that we live in light, we transmit it. It's a reciprocal relationship. The more darkness, the less light. The more light, the less darkness. They coexist. We're human beings. Step 10, watch for the darkness. You know when the darkness is? Look at the PowerPoint. It comes right out of the 12 and 12. Spot check, inventory. When I'm disturbed, there's something wrong with me. It's 100%, by the way. I don't have a part in my disturbance. I have 100%. Huge revelation to own that. Embarrassing at 10 years of sobriety to understand and to experience in technicolor my unmanageability of restless, irritable, and discontent. Despite the fact I had an active meditation practice at that point for 5 years, I still hadn't experienced the full relief of understanding unmanageability and dealing it with a consistent basis on the daily. So my meditation fills the channel on a daily basis. I sit in the presence of power, receiving power, much like plugging in your cell phone. I've begun using that metaphor just in the last couple of months. If we don't plug our cell phone in on a regular basis, it doesn't have power and therefore it's of no use to us. So we make sure on a daily basis, at least, we empower our cell phone because it's our lifeline to many of our activities. Is meditation the same value proposition for you? Bill uses a different one in the 12 and 12. As air, water, sunshine, and food sustain and nourish the body, prayer and meditation sustain and nourish the soul. That's his value proposition. We won't do meditation because it's a good idea. We won't do it because it's step 11. We won't do it because our sponsor asked us to. We'll only do it when, in fact, we see a value to it. If you're not doing it, it's because it's not a value to it. No, I'm hearing your unsaid words. Oh, no, I see it's important. I just don't have time. Oh, I know it's important, but I don't know how to do it. Oh, no, I can't sit still. No, none of that is legitimate. None of that is legitimate. It's you don't have a real value. You don't really believe that you need power on a daily basis. You don't really believe that you're powerless. You don't really believe that there is a God deep down inside of you. You don't really believe that you have a relationship or can have a relationship with power and that you need it. If you're not doing meditation, I'm sorry to be so confrontive, how unlike me. So think about it. Did you miss a meal today or yesterday? Why is that? Well, because I get headaches or I get mean or I lose my energy. Sure, because it's of value to eat. It's of value to sleep. It's of value to drink liquids or water on a regular basis. So we do that. We will do meditation when it's of value. See, that's the principle there. And then organically, this process is very organic. We clear the channel so there's a flow. We fill the channel from the flow, and we allow the channel to empty through the wounds that we've incurred. We become the wounded healer. Now, those are not my words. I'm picking them up from other people who have had the experience and use really good words. Notice I don't put service in step 12. I use the terms from the big book, actually. Helping others. I changed that for this presentation. I used to have service in there, but I'm challenging all my words to make them more useful and more accurate. All it is helping others. It doesn't say sponsor. It doesn't say steps. It doesn't say 12-step fellowship. Nope, helping others. Nobody's coming. Nobody's coming. No, it's a sign over a psychologist's office in West LA that was brought to my attention. I thought about it in meditation, and many of you have seen this. I am the one I am waiting for. I did not know that I did not know. And that I'm 100% responsible for all my defects, but I'm also 100% responsible for my journey to transformation. I can't make it happen, but it's not normally going to happen to me without me. So I have a conscience practice, step 10. I'm aware of my feelings and I make an effort to stay aware, awake to the disturbance, taking responsibility. A word I haven't used, I don't believe yet. Oh, yes, I did in the step 3 comments with the arms out of line and in line, alignment. It's not in the big book, that word, but it's the best word I know that describes step 3. A decision to turn, to place our will in alignment with our understanding of God's will. Our understanding comes from step 11. The end of step 11 says the power to know what to do and the power to do it. Praying for the knowledge of your will for me and the power to carry it out. Alignment. A fancy word for self-actualization that comes from my use of the human development model coming from Maslow. Some of you have seen that before. It's not relevant today. But becoming a lantern, again, a very favorite metaphor of mine. If I have light inside me, that is not me, but that is down inside of me and is available to me, I want to allow that light to shine through me. That would be a lantern on the path. So I improve the light in me so that I can become a lantern. I'm responsible for the effort at my meditation, not the result. It's a journey, not a destination. I've done, as I mentioned, many workshops on step 11. These are summaries of my experience with it and my recommendation to everybody. It's not a task to be accomplished. We don't meditate to become good meditators. We meditate, that's a quote from Rabbi Heschel. We meditate, it continues, to have a relationship with the divine. A relationship. It's an experience, it's not a feeling. I call it self-realization, again, from the Maslow human development model. So this is the step 12 itself. We've looked at parts of it up till now. Spiritual awakening, principles. But there's a part here that was implied in some of the other comments that I haven't addressed, and that's about carrying the message. What's the message? Well, listen to the step itself. Having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, we tried to carry this message. Oh, the message is you too can have a spiritual awakening. And when I carry that message to you, I ensure my inoculation. Page 89 in the big book, the beginning of chapter 7. Nothing will so much ensure immunity as intensive work with others. You talk about heavy, does it? Intensive work, diligent effort, thinking honestly, seeking diligently, seeking fearlessly. Bill puts a jackhammer word behind many of the words to give it this sense of intensity. Well, it's life and death, that's all. Immunization in the pandemic world that we've become unfortunately too acquainted with, it's life and death. There's a suggestion for immunization and many ways to do that in the pandemic. I'm not making any comment about that, although I just got my 3rd shot. That booster, I hope it works. It has so far. But this inoculates us against the unmanageability, against our self-centeredness when I'm thinking and acting on behalf of other people. Who's coming to help them? The people suffering from addiction, perhaps in your own fellowship. We have the world of all fellowships are exposed to this call and perhaps even on the call. But this is also for people who are not in any addiction or any fellowship, isn't it? Bill Wilson made sure of that in the preface to the very first edition of the Big Book. You take a look at it, the preface to the first edition, the first paragraph, the last line. And besides, our way of living may have its advantages for all. Talking about all of the human race. Now, our focus will be at first certainly in our fellowship. Mine is across all fellowships because it's a 12-step orientation. The addiction is not the problem. It's a problem, it's just not the problem. Unmanageability is the problem, and the solution to unmanageability is a spiritual solution. And when we solve the unmanageability problem, the addiction problem will be solved. That's not a theory. That's the confirmation in the Big Book and the experience. We are the ones they are waiting for. You have a special gift, a fingerprint that is unique to you, a DNA that is unique to you, and your gift of sharing your experiences unique to you in your relationships. Bill doesn't give us a list of principles, but chapter 8 talks about to the wives. Today it would be called to the significant others. The next chapter 9 is to the family. The next chapter 10 is to the employer. It's about relationships at work, principles at work. The next chapter 11 has a fancy title, poetic, a vision for you. But when you read it, it's about practicing principles in your fellowship and in your community. It's a learning experience to go through each of those chapters, looking for the principles that are implied in the chapter so that you can craft your own principles as you see them modeled in those chapters, maybe even modifying the list that I have. That list, by the way, of principles would serve as a great inventory for your nightly review, wouldn't it? Are these the principles that operated in my life today? Are these the actions that I took today based on those principles? Or in the morning, taking one of those principles as a source of meditation for the morning, and maybe 12 days in a row or 12 weeks in a row, however you'd want to do it. Try to be focused on and conscious of and practicing that particular principle that day or that week. Practice. It's like getting on a bicycle. At first, you have training wheels and a guide, a teacher, a father, a mother, a helper. Eventually, you get enough skill that the training wheels come off, and you get a 20-gear mountain bike. But compassion is a practice at the same time, transmitting the light, guided by organic principles of reality. This is what we're talking about when I talk about principles. They're not made up stuff. They're a perception of what's actually in reality. Gravity is real. It's a principle of physics. It's non-negotiable and immutable. It doesn't change. The law of gravity on Earth doesn't change. Heavy things fall to a place of rest. It's not negotiable. Doesn't matter what you think or feel or want or need. That's the same with these principles we're talking about. These human principles, these spiritual principles, They're not feelings. They're not thoughts. They're not poetry. And when you go against the principles, they crush you. That's where suffering comes from. So in the 12th step, our intention is to help, of course, not manipulate. Motivate by unconditional love. And that's a hackneyed phrase that has lost most of its meaning for most of us. It's used so often in so many different directions. I found a word, and I've mentioned it before. You might want to look up the word to perhaps embrace it as an alternative to the word unconditional love, and that's altruism. It's a wonderful word. The definition is providing a benefit to someone else with no possible benefit for yourself. It has nothing to do with yourself, it has everything to do with the other person. Now, of course, if you have trouble with codependency or attachment to people or people pleasing, you're probably going to need a little help from resources of people and or programs to be able to understand the difference between helping and enabling. That fancy word I used from Maslow is called self-transcendence, an organic process of lighting the path for others. I'm not talking about these as being sort of conscious decisions with a lot of effort behind them. My experience is that it was like the acorn that became the oak tree over 100 years. There was a life force in it that brought it through all of the various cycles of growth. That's the same with the spiritual journey. There are cycles of growth. It's not a linear path, the steps. We don't walk up the steps once. It's a spiral path. And we keep going around and around and around and meeting ourselves again for the very first time as we have new consciousness and new awakenings. It has many moving parts. Meetings, of course, they're coming back into existence. Changed forever by the technical ability to use the Zoom. Probably a good thing in balance if we can stay balanced with that. The big book as the textbook, the 12 steps as the precise path, the process. Prayer, of course, because we're powerless. Helping because, in fact, that's our call. It's a human nature. It's not especially spiritually virtuous. All of the work I've done in the happiness area through research and credible reading of credible sources, books and studies have indicated that the two things that will make you happy is having a meaning bigger than yourself and contributing to the people around you. That will create happiness. It's an indirect relationship. To be conscious of a context for yourself as having meaning you develop for yourself. And then to contribute to the people around you in some way. We're not talking about working steps. We're not talking about being a sponsor or a step guide. Oh, I mean, essentially we are, but in the biggest of concepts, we're talking about helping. I dropped the word service. I use the word help. More practical. But sponsorship is the key. Having one and being one, I believe. Certainly having one. Whether you are a sponsor or not, that's between you and your sponsor and you and your God. But having a sponsor is a sine qua non, they would say in Latin, without which you cannot do this thing credibly, I believe, long-term. We need an accountability partner. We need a cheerleader. We need a mentor. We need a mirror that's objective that will reflect back to us the truth. This is a process. You've seen me talk about the dimmer switch, physical sobriety, steps 1 through 9. emotional sobriety, step 10, spiritual sobriety, steps 11 and 12. The dimmer switch goes up, the lights get brighter, but it's a dimmer switch. The ego regenerates itself, according to Dr. Tebow, the psychiatrist that was helping Bill originally. He said, Bill got it right. The first 9 steps are for the deflation of the ego at death. But the ego has an uncanny way of regenerating itself. That unhealthy self, that self-centeredness, that unmanageability, Bill said it, we're not cured, we have a daily reprieve. And if we allow that unmanageability to have its way with us by, oh my God, Eric Fromm said it about 6 months ago. I was reading one of his books. He was a famous psychiatrist from the 40s, 50s, maybe early 60s. He wasn't talking about spirituality. He wasn't talking about 12-step. He wasn't talking about addiction. He was talking about human development. He said the first disintegration of human in terms of their quality of life, the first disintegration is the first compromise of principle. That hit me between the eyes as so accurate. The first compromise of principle. It reflects the guy I told you about who said there's only there are 2 sides to the 12-step program. One is the spiritual, the other is the outside. He also talked about principles. He said the drink is not the relapse. The drink is not the relapse. The addiction, the drug or the food or the gambling or the pornography, that's not the relapse. He said the relapse happened a day before, a week before, a month before, with a held secret, untreated anger, a held and not disclosed fear, a compromise of your principles with regard to your your sexual behavior, a little flirtatious, we call it. I was just flirting and having fun. No, you're actually betraying the commitment you have to fidelity. At least this is the conversation I had with myself. It may not be your conversation. The first compromise of my principle is the beginning of the slippery slope, and the dimmer switch goes down a notch at a time, and the darkness descends and the obsession returns. And when the obsession returns, we're hijacked back into our addiction. The dimmer switch is on a spring-loaded default position to go backwards, spring-loaded to go backwards. So I need to stay gently with my shoulder, gently pressed up against it. No violence here. Stay gently pressed up against it, a daily reprieve. Stay gently pressed up against it, not cured. Practicing 10, 11, and 12 gently on a daily basis, holding yourself accountable on a weekly or monthly or regular periodic basis with a sponsor or a step guide or an accountability partner of some kind, because I will compromise and cut myself slack. I cannot objectively be objective because I'm the subject. This is our way of life, turning. You want a litmus test for the spiritual condition? Take a look at this inventory. Of course, abstinence is the bottom line, or moderation, depending on your addiction. And then the opposite of anger and resentment is love and forgiveness, isn't it? The opposite of fear and anxiety is trust and tranquility. The opposite of inappropriate sex behavior is behavior based on principles. The obvious opposite of dishonesty is rigorous honesty. Bill spends a page on page 58, and the beginning of that chapter, the title of it is How It Works. There must be a wonderful correlation between Bill's emphasis on rigorous honesty and how it works. No secrets, no shades, no clouds, complete transparency. The opposite of unhealthy guilt and shame could be healthy guilt and shame, but I like the term freedom. Oh my God, I've never had such freedom. Since 1988, I have lived a life that flourishes. Not a life without problems, but a life in which I can handle my problems with a sense of dignity. My unhealthy self-esteem, for which I compensated with my narcissism and my grandiosity, has slowly and organically transformed, like the metamorphosis of a butterfly, where there's healthy self-worth now, a sense of meaning to my life and a sense of purpose to my life and a sense of joy on a daily basis, a sense of adventure on a daily basis. Gerald May uses this contrast of willfulness, which is that self-centeredness of unmanageability, and willingness, which is the proper use of my will. As Bill says, thy will be done. It's a prayer. Thy will be done. It's a prayer asking to be in alignment with reality, asking to be in alignment with God's will, whatever that means. I use the term reality. That's God's will. Reality as it manifests, obviously. And I just need to be identifying reality as it manifests and accepting to it and adjusting to it. Reality never adjusts to me. Emotional sobriety is the perspective that I need to adjust to reality. No, it's not a passive thing, and it's not a accommodating thing in terms of enabling at all. There are times when you have to confront reality as it's manifesting because you're operating on principle. That's the serenity prayer, isn't it? What can I influence? What can't I influence? I drop the word control. I don't control anything outside of me. I don't control anything inside of me. I don't control it. I have influence. And wisdom is the outcome of all that effort. Wisdom is the outcome of making mistakes and making corrections. My favorite phrase recently is course correction. That's all I'm doing. I made a mistake, I course correct. I make a mistake, I course correct. I ask for help in prayer. I ask for help in guidance from some human being, whether that be a friend or a daughter or a sponsor or a therapist or a spiritual director. I have many resources on call because I need all the help that I can get. Both of them, this way of life is based on my will. I have free will. Bill says on page 53, what our free will is. It's not free with regard to our addiction. Look at page 43. It's not free with regard to unmanageability. Look at page 62. Powerless over my addiction, powerless over unmanageability, my self-centeredness. On page 53, he says, oh, God is or God isn't, what is your choice? Oh, that's my power, God or no God. And in step 3, a decision to turn, to be in alignment with my understanding of reality as it's manifesting, God's will as I perceive it and interpret it. Out of alignment or in alignment. I'm still using my will. Out of alignment, I will suffer because reality will crush me. Principles are immutable. Principles are non-negotiable. I need to figure out what the principle is. That's the direction I give to my sponsees when they have disturbance after we have some conversation. What's the principle? Always take the high road. Identify the principle, number one. Take the high road and be generous. It doesn't come out of the big book necessarily, but it comes out of the big book and my relationship with practice of what really works. Operate on principle 100%. Always take the high road. You're welcome to take the low road. It will have consequences. My suggestion is take the high road and be generous. Be generous with yourself and be generous with others and be generous with life. Common sense. We need to be in connection with people who have uncommon common sense, because I don't. But over practice, over time, I have some experience, so it's much more in line with reality. Becoming a lantern, lighting the path. And so I'd like to wrap it by talking about this daily practice, which leads to happiness, a sense of other and a sense of others, a sense of the 11th step and a sense of the 12th step. This is a summary from all of the studies that I read from Harvard and the University of Pennsylvania, positive psychology and happiness, respectively. Make a commitment to daily consciousness and compassion with a gratitude list. I mean, most of the spiritual practices and traditions talk about that, but good psychology has really recommended it as a growth in positivity, a conscious appreciation of your list. And the way I've interpreted it is add one thing to it each day, just one that you're grateful for. The rule is, however, you cannot add anything that's on the list already. Obviously, you're quite challenged after 60 or 90 days to come up with what innovation or creativity you can see as you're grateful for. But what it does, it reorients, it reframes your perspective from any sense of negativity to positivity. Prayer, of course, because we're powerless. I mentioned the 6th and 7th step. Very short in the big book, wonderful commentaries in the 12 and 12, probably one of the more powerful experiences I had in transformation. I'm powerless to change on my own power, but I'm responsible for it. So I pray for help and then I keep myself accountable. In meditation, try to be as conscious as possible. The purpose of step 11 has only one purpose: guidance. That came out of the Oxford group. Bill and Bob were trained in meditation so that they would get guidance as to how to conduct their day and how to conduct their life. There's lots of other benefits to meditation. There's all kinds of other purposes to meditation. Step 11, there's only one purpose: to have power and guidance. Listen to the prayer at the end, the recommendation at the end of step 11. Praying for knowledge of God's will. I need to know what to do, and power to carry it out. Even though I know what to do, I regularly don't do it. That's the unmanageability. So I even need power to do it. I know better, but I don't do better. So I need power so that not only do I know better, I have the power to do better. And then those helpful actions of step 12, of course. There's a book by Rabbi Shapiro called Love and Kindness. Wonderful. Loving kindness, loving kindness. That's the lens through which I look. How can I be helpful? And one of that is to hold an attitude of being kind. Depends on where we are in our stage of emotional, physical, and spiritual development. We'll need different kinds of people for accountability and different cycles of accountability. But unless I have an accountability partner for my commitments, I usually slack off. This is the promise of optimal living. Our way of living is optimal living, a life that flourishes instead of flounder. Bill sums it up really nicely in the big book. I think it's in A Vision for You. We keep our head in the clouds. Steps 10 and 11, they're integral. He says inventory and meditation go hand in glove. And we keep our feet on the ground. Just a great summary of living by principle. The principle of head in the clouds is I need guidance and I need power. On feet on the ground, I need to contribute to the people around me. That's just my human nature. It's not because I'm an addict. It's not because I'm in a program of recovery. It's because I'm a human being. And this is how humans are built, to be in community and to be connected and to contribute. Bill summarizes it in a different way. 12-step spirituality says, trust God, clean house, and I changed this. Help others. As I said, I converted the word service to help. It has, I think, a much more realistic and usable frame of reference. This is our way of life. This is our practice. My own spiritual director has a mantra. He's not in a program, but he's deeply spiritual and has a spiritual way of life. He says all people on a spiritual path have a spiritual practice, and they practice their practice, and they're faithful to their practice. And when they're faithful to their practice is faithful to them. Well, that was a lot. Thank you for bearing with me. I was on a flow and a roll, so I didn't stop to breathe and or to ask you if you had any questions or comments.
So much really does resonate, especially the I want to say discipline, accountability, I think is the word that you're using that really resonates.
Yep.
Yeah. And that's what has made the difference for me as a lifelong spiritual seeker. I could so relate to so much of what you said about like, yeah, I did this thing and that thing and the other thing and grew and learned. Super good for me.
Yep.
But
Next.
Yeah, exactly. Like, yay. So I thought I had a higher power. I thought I had a relationship with God, but I sure couldn't stop eating and I couldn't stop spending compulsively. And I hated myself. So 3.5 years of recovery and daily accountability on food and money. Yeah. I have people around me and structures and commitments that hold me accountable.
Yeah.
God. So I get to have that serenity of not hating myself because I don't hate the way I act in those ways. And today, I want to do better as a mother. I want to do better with my environment and physical objects. I want to be more courageous in my service and my work. And I don't know the right level of accountability because I can overwhelm myself. I can have outrageous expectations. Yeah. And that's what I try to do in meditation is ask like, okay, God, I know that I waffle from like expecting too little of myself to expecting too much and back again. So right. Show me what you would have me do.
Yeah.
But what are your thoughts about accountability? You know, when the sort of the terrain of the accountability seems to want to expand. I want to be accountable for how the environment feels here, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. You got my question? I'll stop.
Well, I have lots of experience with seeking accountability in different areas with different cycles. So I've had a sponsor, and I always will have a sponsor. I use that less frequently now than ever. I have a step guide occasionally when I want to do the steps or when I have questions for the steps. I have a therapist. I haven't used him in over a decade, but he was very instrumental in helping me navigate the emotions and the development of my whatever. And right from the beginning of my conversion, when I did the steps, I got a spiritual director. And I've used them periodically through the cycle, but now I'm finding I'm using that person more frequently than I've ever used anybody else currently. So that would be my sounding board. And perhaps my recommendation to you is somebody who has a broad perspective on the spiritual life and maybe a sounding board in that area. There's a group called Spiritual Directors International, and they have literally a directory of trained people in most of the geographies throughout the world. So they would be a resource for you to sort of, unless you could find one and want to find one in your local community, in a church or some other resource in the local community, which actually would be wonderful, because you could then establish maybe some face-to-face time. The other thing, there was one other thought I had on that. Well, certainly an active relationship with an experienced person in your 12-step fellowship, whether you call that a sponsor or a step guide or just a companion. I think that's very critical. Oh yeah, here's where I have two daughters, each of them 30 years in a 12-step program, one in Al-Anon and one in AA, and both of them have done the work out of the book as I've experienced it and as I teach it. So they're very substantial, conscious, hard-ass women. And they love me enough to tell me the truth. So I speak to them in a transparent way on a certainly weekly basis about where I'm at, so that, number one, they're not worried about doddering old dad falling off the cliff someplace, and but that they can give me some feedback because they know me so well. So don't overlook perhaps a family member who you would have that kind of relationship with, because they're experienced and love you enough to tell you the truth to hurt your feelings, because they love you enough. They don't care about your feelings.
Principles before personalities, right?
Say it again. Oh, yes, yes. Well, that's right. So relevant for us right now, isn't it? And I didn't use that quote. I'm so glad you brought it up. Principles before personalities. That has a whole new meaning in light of what I unpacked today, I hope.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I want to share two things, maybe three, and maybe you can comment. You know, I love that you really, really touched me with this shifting in step 12 from service to helping. And when you said it, I just, you know, right now in recovery, and I'm glad you mentioned spiritual director, because it's been vital in my world consistently, very, very vital, because it's more living in the in spirit and the heart center and moving, flowing from that frequency. And when you said that, I'm like, wow, now I know why I always had this sense every time I would even say the word service, it seemed more like it was mental activity right here,
Right.
Energetically. And it was like egoic movements.
Potential. Yeah.
Yeah. In other words, I'm going to do, and I'm going to, instead of helping, is the heart center.
Yeah.
It's happening organically because I'm led by the spirit.
I hope people are hearing this, because I'm not going to repeat it, but that's exactly the nature of it. Organic. The flow is from steps 1 through 9 into 10, 11, and 12. The flow is from 10 to 11 to 12. And it's not, I mean, sometimes we have to do acts contrary to our will, especially in the first 5 years of our recovery. I mean, I consider that a newcomer, 5 years. I don't want to discourage anybody, but that was my experience. Go ahead.
Yeah, beautiful. So that really, I'm really taking that and gonna I'm going to start using, because it feels more organic to use the word help. The other thing, and I've heard it before from emotional sobriety workshops that I'm involved with, is nobody's coming. But
Yeah.
today, when I heard it, the phrase that I embody myself is that which I'm looking for is what's looking.
Yes.
And so there it is. Nobody's coming.
Right. Yeah, God's
It's
not
like-
coming. God's not coming.
Yeah,
God's
Yeah.
not coming.
right.
Because if there is a God, God's already fully here.
Amen. So I was like, oh, and it was like, whoa, all these lights went off.
Yeah.
And the other part of, to me, like true spiritual freedom is in this spiritual discipline and in this energetic movement of step 12 is, for me, this, I refer to it as the art of differentiation and non-reactivity, which causes this organic helping.
Yes.
So this differentiate, which is part of Bowen's theory, has helped me immensely
Yeah.
in that area. So that's enough out of me. Thank you so much. I love you. Blessings on your head.
Thank you so much.
Hi, Herb.
Hi.
I just wanted to say thank you. I joined you in January of this year. I've been hanging out with you once a month. I even got to see the Fred Luskin workshop and Dr. Finley. Every single piece
Wow.
helps my dimmer switch get brighter. I was
Yeah.
very deeply depressed in January, and I feel so much relief in the months.
I'm hearing it. I'm hearing the joy in your voice and the smile on your face. It's very real. Yeah.
Yes, sir. But my question stems from I'm a teacher, and it's been a very kind of
Oh,
hectic, 20 months.
can't even imagine. Yeah.
And so I had a bit of a kerfluffle this week, and what I want to say is that I ate compulsively for the first time in a long time, and it took me off guard a little bit.
Sure.
But I didn't sink into full-on binging, just letting everything go. So I feel like that is a mark of recovery for me. And my question is, how do you encourage people who know the steps, who, they pick up again? Like, I am disappointed.
Yeah.
Like, I picked up, but
the most challenging addiction that I'm aware of, I'm not a food addict. I'm not in a food program, but I'm exposed to them for the last 12 years. And probably 20+% of the people that come to any of my work are in one of the food programs. There's about 8 of them, all with different protocols, all with different measurements, all with different definitions of abstinence, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I see that the food addiction is very subtle, very complicated, and very individual. So there's hardly ever any black and white that you can say that applies to everybody. I mean, flour and sugar are typically pretty much the alcoholic components. But and the person who I was talking to earlier about accountability reminded me that one of the single most important areas of accountability, at least in the first 5 years of a food program, is the scale. I don't mean the weighting scale. I mean the food scale. That's your accountability partner for the first 5 years, at least. I'm not in the program, so I'm not making a recommendation, but I'm hearing it from other people that scale tells you what your food is for that meal or for that day. The scale is objective. You are not. And as long as you've had a conversation, an intelligent and healthy conversation with an experienced person, please hear the qualifiers, because there's lots of unhealthy people. But with that, I think that's one of the key components to dealing effectively with that addiction. At the same time, doing the step work despite your addiction, despite your relapse, doing the step work so that you can finish 9 and hope to receive the neutrality that's promised. Does that make sense?
It does. Thank you so much.
Yeah. The hardest addiction to deal with is that one. I'm convinced of it from my exposure to the people and having these conversations. I try not to make recommendations because I don't come from an experience or in the program or with the addiction, but I've heard so many people, and the suffering is outrageous. The suffering is just outrageous. And I try to give a little hope in that. Those two things are really important. Sponsor is really important, but experience, common sense, helpful. Yeah, we don't need police, and we don't need parents, and we don't need rigidity.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Well, thanks for prompting that. Thank you.
You were saying earlier about, when you stop, but you start again, it's because, one of the reasons is because you haven't dealt with something. And I don't know why I keep picking up the food when every morning I have to face my sponsor, and I hate it.
How long have you been in a 12-step program?
I would say I've been on and off for about 5 years.
Okay, so you've been around for a while in OA.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, I was in FA and then I moved to OA. So this is kind of an thing.
And all right. And how long have you been working with the current sponsor?
Almost a year.
Oh, wonderful. Good.
Yeah.
Good. You got some traction. Have you done the steps out of the big book?
So I'm just starting. So I'm in your Sunday group.
Oh, you are
I've
just starting then. Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, in the last 12-step program or whatever, in FA, I didn't do the steps because I never got abstinent. Where in OA, you work the steps from the beginning, and I really appreciate that.
Great. Okay. So your question was about how to deal effectively with food, right?
Yeah, well, I know that
you can't.
Yeah.
No, that's not a trick answer.
Yeah, no.
I mean, I wonder what part of powerless, no choice, allows you to be effective.
Right.
Yeah.
None.
So do the steps, connect to your sponsor, do what is suggested, and finish the 9th step.
Mm.
Now that's probably a year away.
Yeah,
maybe 6-7 months if you're in the program and you keep pace with the instructions.
Mm-hmm.
You will be deep into your 9th step by May or June.
So, but because I feel like I keep eating and breaking because of unresolved relationships.
Maybe.
And how do you just accept that and move on?
Yes, but I'm going to ask you a different question.
Mm-hmm.
What part of no choice are you not embracing? See, it's not about you figuring it out and going, oh, now I've got, so I'll be okay. No, sorry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what I'm trying to do.
Yeah, you are. Yeah. Oh, and we would all like that. It's just not available because powerless means no choice. No choice means no choice.
Yeah,
you don't have a choice.
No, you're right.
Oh man, that's dark.
Mm-hmm.
So you show up and you hope and you pray for the grace to connect to your willingness to take action, knowing that at the very least, at the end of the 9th step, it promises you neutrality.
Mm-hmm.
That's the best I can do.
Yeah, I gotta stop trying to figure it out and just accept
no, don't stop figuring it out.
Right.
But just don't allow it to get in your way and change your mood.
Right. Yes. That's the hard part. Yes.
Yeah. Try to maintain a positive attitude towards your question that isn't being answered.
Thanks, Herb.
Oh God, that's not much of an answer. But are you familiar with
It is. It is. It just confirms what I've been hearing. So it's good.
Oh, good. Are you familiar with A Vision for You?
Yes, I'm starting to listen to that. So
They're the best group that I know of. I don't know of them all, but I've been exposed to them. I'm very impressed because they're connected to the Big Book and the step process in the same rigorous way that I recommend.
okay.
Yeah.
Yes. So we'll still start, go ahead on this path. Thank you so much, Herb.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you.
I feel like I'm having a bit of an aha moment.
Great.
And I loved what you said in terms of the first disintegration is the first compromise of principle.
I'm quoting somebody else, but yes.
That's brilliant.
It's brilliant.
So brilliant. And I'm listening to yours and Alan Berger's Emotional Sobriety as well.
Yep.
And I'm reading his book, and I am trying to reconcile my understanding of unmanageability.
Okay.
And you say unmanageability, I mean, it is the problem. And what I was making a mistake with was focusing so much on the food. I mean,
yes,
it's been, for me, it's been about 4 years in recovery. 3 years of it has been in your program.
yeah,
And I'm finally coming to the understanding that unmanageability is the juxtaposition between my strong need to be who I am, and I think you'll recognize where this is coming from, versus the strong need to be liked and wanted by society and by my community.
Right.
And please, I would be really interested in your feedback that the unmanageability occurs way before I start binging and purging.
Absolutely. That's correct.
Way before. And so it's like
probably yes, actually. Yes.
Well, I have an example, if I may.
Sure.
Yesterday, I went out walking with some ladies that I'd like to get to know, and we're getting to know. And I noticed at various points in the walk, the three of them were walking together, and I was either behind or in front. And what got triggered was my sense of rejection, my victimness, my et cetera, and thinking, oh, they want to be together. They don't want me part of that. You know, but at the same time, it was like, okay, I'm not going to fall for this, and I'm going to resist it. And all of a sudden I realized I was walking with my fists really tight. And instead of saying, you know, divine will, I need your help here because I don't know what to do, and I'm falling into the wrong channel. And I finally did that. And when I did that and I surrendered and said, I'm totally powerless over this, all of a sudden things just changed. The whole dynamic, everybody started to come around me. Now it's like, what's going on here? And also the other thing I noticed was when I surrendered it, you know, we have dogs on the walks. All the dogs came to say hi. And then when I was in my mind, in my head, in the problem, so to speak, the dogs avoided me. Okay, this is sounding kind of weird.
No. I think it's actually quite accurate.
Yeah, I guess it's they pick up energy or something.
The smell.
I'm
very confident that they have a sense of safety and a sense of unsafe.
Yeah. So, but it's really interesting, this whole idea of unmanageability and really paying attention now. And when I don't pay attention to it, that's when I'm thinking about food all the time and wanting to escape.
Well, because the tension has to be relieved. Mm-hmm. The easy way, the default position for an addict is to use. Mm-hmm. That will release the tension immediately. We know that. And we forget that it's not long-term, it's just short-term.
Yeah.
But now with your consciousness, you are able to kind of like challenge yourself and then use one of the tools. It sounded to me like the beginning of a 10th step,
Mhm.
all right, which is the prayer, all right. And somehow there was a equanimity that appeared in you that kind of in an osmosis way, sort of saturated your soul.
Yeah, yeah,
I mean, I'm being poetic about it.
yeah. I like the poetry. It was interesting to me how when I chose to go that direction,
Yeah.
it happened fairly quickly.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
but you've been at it for a while.
Yeah.
You're not a newbie to this. You said you've been in
No.
the process and in my workshops for 3 years.
Yeah, but what's I guess is a testament to is
Yes.
the practice.
That is, well, that's exactly right. Thank you for bringing that word up, because that's why it happened to me about 6 months ago that I connected the word practice with life.
Yeah,
Oh yeah, that's what we're doing. We're not living life, we're practicing living life.
exactly.
Yeah,
Great.
yeah.
Well, thank you, Herb.
All right. Let's pray this prayer of St. Francis. Adapted the title for reflecting what we walked through today together. Become the lantern for the purpose of lighting the path. See, there's hardly any work to it, and many of you use the term organic. It's organic. You will become the lantern because you will be in relationship to the light. And the clouds and the darkness will be dissipated, and the light will shine in you, to you, but then through you. That way you can light the path. And these are the promises. They call it the prayer of St. Francis. But on the right-hand side, as you're looking at the prayer, those are the promises which are coming out of addressing those bedevilments. Lord, make me a channel of your peace, that where there is hatred, I may bring love. That where there is wrong, I may bring the spirit of forgiveness. That where there is discord, I may bring harmony. That where there is error, I may bring truth. That where there is doubt, I may bring faith. That where there is despair, I may bring hope. That where there are shadows, I may bring light. That where there is sadness, I may bring joy. Lord, grant that I may seek rather to comfort than to be comforted, to be understood, to love than to be loved, for getting that one finds. It is by forgiving that one is forgiven. It is by dying that one awakens to eternal life. Amen. And we're talking about the diminishment and death of the false self for the absolute freedom and emergence of the true self, our real self, organic. It's an organic, like the metamorphosis of the monarch butterfly. Very dramatic and very organic. Thanks, everybody.